Dr. LeBaron, we both talk a lot about how all these other machines on the market using a nasal cannula cannot guarantee a precise concentration being delivered. We all have different breathing patterns. They usually have to ramp up the power. They become dangerous, potentially explosive, in the surrounding area. This is actually documented in case reports in the research of them detonating in people's faces, facial fractures, burnt lungs, uh, very horrific things. Now, what kind of solutions did we look for to ensure that this doesn't happen and to ensure whether it's a 90-year-old grandma with terminal lung cancer having a panic attack or a 300-pound bodybuilder practicing deep breathing, that the precise concentration is delivered to all people all the time?
Yeah, this is really what sets our machine apart. And I just want to make sure people understand the problem a little bit more with the typical nasal cannula. When you put the nasal cannula in, first off, you only get that hydrogen gas in when you inspire. So inspiration is not only from above, but what comes from when you inhale, inspiration. That's the inspiration portion. And hydrogen gas only enters the lungs during the inspiratory phase of respiration. You only breathe about 1/3 of the time during normal breathing. That's about 20 seconds. So if you are going to inhale a minute ventilation of around, let's say 10 liters, because you're just sitting here kind of active, so you have 10 liters you're going to inhale per minute, you're going to get all 10 liters in 20 seconds. That means you're going to be taking these breaths, right? That is going to have a pretty high flow rate. So when you have a nasal cannula in, it's going to dilute the hydrogen gas from the outside air, right? So you have the hydrogen gas, let's say pure hydrogen gas into the nasal cannula, and then you take an inhalation, and that 100% hydrogen gas at whatever flow rate gets diluted down a lot. It can easily get diluted down below 1%, which is no longer therapeutic according to the clinical research. Or let's say it's a really high flow rate, and now even gets diluted down, but the concentration is still above 4%, which may not be as effective. And we know it's flammable because anything above 4% is flammable. Or even if the flow rate is really quite low. So the flow rate, 100% hydrogen gas, relatively low flow rate, and you take an inhalation, and it dilutes the gas during that inspiratory phase, so it's not flammable during the inspiratory phase, but then during the transition, when you're not breathing, what happens? The hydrogen gas fills the nasal cannula up with what? With pure hydrogen gas, and it gets diluted a little bit. So for that transient moment, you have pockets of flammable explosive gas in your nares, in your nostrils, in your lungs, and that of course, is potentially dangerous. We don't want to do that in clinical research. We want to avoid all possible situations where flammability could occur because it actually requires less energy to ignite hydrogen in air than is required to get a static discharge. So when you walk across the carpet or you rub your hands to your balloon or whatever, right, and you get a spark and you touch the doorknob, that requires a certain amount of energy to get that sparking. It takes less energy to ignite hydrogen gas. So we got to be really, really careful about keeping the concentration of hydrogen below 4%. So this is why I had to design this machine so we could ensure that regardless of how big you are, because as Alex mentioned, everybody has a different ventilation rate, right? You have a big sumo wrestler or a small grandma or maybe even a child. You need to be careful that you're not giving them too much hydrogen gas where it may not be as effective and it has the risk of flammability, potentially even hypoxia if it's really high flow rate with a very small individual. These are things to really be concerned about, right? I assure you, hydrogen gas is not so therapeutic and effective that it's worth the risk of blowing your face off. Maybe it's a little bit too graphic. But we do need to be careful when it comes to inhaling molecular hydrogen, especially such an early preliminary research on this. So that's why we want to ensure the concentration stays below 4%, really at all times. That's why I feel comfortable endorsing this machine, because that's how it was designed, so it can be used in studies. So we want to keep the concentration below 4%. We need to ensure it's above 1%. We want to be able to say it's 1, 2, 3, or 4%, or actually any. It's infinite variability. So you can actually go 0.1, 0.2, right, all the way up. And that is how this machine works, regardless of your ventilation rate.